In recent months, climate emergencies have been declared by Canada and a number of other countries. I'm sure you've heard them. Cities have also sounded the alarm. Well, this morning, in a brand new declaration, 11,000 scientists from 153 countries are bolstering that claim. Here are some of what's in that declaration published in the journal BioScience. The Alliance of World Scientists says it has a moral obligation to warn humanity. It says greenhouse gas emissions are still rising and that recent efforts to reduce them are not enough. The declaration also says the climate crisis is accelerating faster than many scientists predicted, that it's caused even more damage than many had feared. The Alliance says it had to speak out. Why? Because climate change is threatening ecosystems and, get this, the fate of humanity. Scary words there. The fate of humanity. CBC senior science reporter Nicole Mortellaro is going through this report. And Nicole, I know it's a big one, lots of dense information, but 11,000 scientists signed on. That's got to mean something. They managed to find some strong agreement on some very specific areas of concern. Can you point those out?
Yeah, so the report itself actually is pretty straightforward. It's talking about the areas of concern. They have 6. So we have energy, and they say that we need to obviously move away from fossil fuels into low carbon renewable energy. There's short-lived pollutants like soot, like black carbon and hydrofluorocarbons, the HFCs. We might remember that from the ozone layer discussion that we had decades ago. There's also nature, protecting our biosphere, and our forests, et cetera. And food, transferring, we've heard this, of course, a lot lately, plant-based, mostly plant-based foods, which also frees up area for, green areas instead of for cropland. It'll be forest and natural. And also the economy. So they said, we're always focusing on the GDP, but we need to look to sustainability and have economies look at that instead.
But as you say, we've heard these things before, plant-based food, and the topics that you mentioned, fossil fuels and the economy. So really, why pay more attention to this action that they're taking now?
It's interesting. Cities, as you said at the top, cities have declared climate emergencies. Countries have declared climate emergencies, but it hasn't come from a group of scientists themselves. And they really felt that they needed to provide a framework for policymakers. I mean, the IPCC does that, but they wanted to provide something simple and easy for people in towns and cities to use as a guide. 11,000
scientists, huge number. We've got one of them. Will you stick around? Because there's a conversation coming up. Thank you, Nicole. So in this next interview, our Chase team has reached conservation biologist Sheila Colla. She's an assistant professor at Toronto's York University. In fact, she signed that declaration. Sheila, welcome to the program. I've got Nicole here in studio and myself as well. I just want to start off by saying you study pollinators, including bumblebees. Describe for me what you're finding in that sort of micro world.
Thanks for having me. So in terms of pollinators, what we know for our people think of bee declines and they think of pesticides automatically. But what we know for our native pollinators is that climate change is actually a really important threat to our native pollinators, which then threatens our food supply, our ability to pollinate our wild plants, and the ability for things like birds and mammals to feed off of those, like the berries that come from those wild plants.
As I mentioned, I have Nicole Mortellaro here, and she's been walking me through some of the key concerns of this report. And really, Nicole, we've been talking about the bigger picture as well, right?
Yeah, but that's the thing. We talk about climate change as a whole, but all these things are connected with ecology, with our trees, nature. There's nothing that it doesn't change. And I think that's really what's interesting about these 11,000 scientists. They come from all sorts of disciplines.
So Sheila, let me ask you, what is the bigger picture you're seeing? How do you connect the dots, if you will?
Well, what I think is the climate crisis is something that is one of the biggest challenges of our time. And it requires a diverse set of minds and people with different backgrounds, including different scientists. So I'm an ecologist, and I can see in my study system with native bees that climate change is really impacting the way that they're able to find forage, the way they overwinter during the wintertime, whether or not they can store enough food during the summertime and produce enough for the next generation. So it's clear to me in my own study system, but it's also clear to me just as a human being, with young children, that this is something that is a crisis that we need to deal with quickly, and it is an emergency. We don't have a lot of time to really to do something to change this trajectory.
Sheila, I was wondering also, how would it be possible for the bumblebees, to actually adapt to the changing climate?
That's a good question, because we have seen nature sort of adapt over time to differences, right?
Right. So with some plants and birds and butterflies, we've seen that slowly they've been tracking north with climate change. But with bumblebees, it seems to be a little bit different. They seem to be retracting from the southern edges of their ranges, but they're not moving north with climate change. And we think it's because they live in hives, so there's not a lot of opportunity for them to fly further north or to fly up a mountain because they have their one nest site that they need to come back to. So they forage, they leave their nest, they go get some pollen and nectar, and then they come back to the nest. And that doesn't mean that they can move their nest north with climate change. So they might be one of the examples of animals that won't do well under climate change and won't be able to adapt.
As a scientist, Sheila, I'm sure you don't live in a bubble, but you probably spend a lot of time, working on one particular aspect of the effects of climate change. But when you look at the broader spectrum, do you see the political will? Do you see the public will to affect change?
Oh, wow. What a question. I will say that I'm not a climate scientist, so really what I am, passionate about is the fact that there is so much public support. And the youth with these Friday strikes and other youth individuals and organizations that have really been stepping up, they're trying to tell us as adults that we need to do something quickly. And I haven't seen the political will that I want to see. I haven't seen someone saying, yes, this is an emergency, this is a crisis, we need to stop this now. We need to divest, get out of fossil fuels, keep the oil and gas in the ground. What I'm seeing is something that's sort of more incremental and changing slowly, because there's a lot of fear as to what will happen with the economy. But the reality is, when our ecosystems are changing in this way, it's going to be more expensive. It's going to, people are going to die. This is an important thing that we need to think about.
You talk about the word fear, and some people would say it's fear-mongering. I think, as a journalist, information is power, Sheila. And Nicole, I can't speak for you, but let me ask you this, Nicole. Are scientists doing their part in informing people to the best of their ability that this is coming? Is there more that can be done on all fronts to bring on political public will?
One of the things just the scientific community has been, criticized for in general is just the lack of communication skills. But you're seeing an improvement out there on Twitter. You're seeing more and more scientists using social media to get the message out there to the public. So I think there's probably room for improvement. Everybody says that for communication when it comes to science. But I think public policy has to be formed on knowledge, and that's basically what is happening now.
Sheila, final question to you. What's your message to people who are watching and saying, oh, okay, so 11,000 scientists have signed this, 153 cities, blah, blah, blah. What do you say?
I say I know that it's uncomfortable for us to really appreciate this crisis as the crisis that it is. And I know a lot of people care about bees and pollinators right now. It is, one of the most environmentally important topics that we've seen amongst the public. And I will tell you that they are linked, and that we need to care about our environment, the biodiversity crisis, and climate breakdown, because it's happening. It's already happening, especially in the global south, and it's going to keep happening at an accelerated rate. So we need to do something now as scientists and as human beings.
I want to thank you for your time, Sheila. Great to have you on the program. That's conservation biologist Sheila Colla in Toronto. And also here in studio, we've got CBC senior science reporter Nicole Mortellaro. Thank you, Nicole.
Thanks.